Gorgeous. All right. Welcome, everyone. I'm Samantha Johnston. I'm the Executive Director and Curator here at Colorado Photographic Art Center. Thanks for joining us on a Tuesday afternoon for this panel discussion for Archive 192. Just a little quick, Colorado Photographic Art Center is located in Denver, and we are the only nonprofit organization dedicated to photography in the state of Colorado, showing photography as a resource for photographers to learn new skills, to pursue artistic vision, build community, grow creatively, and we were founded in 1963. A huge thank you to the Bonfils Stanton Foundation, SCFD, and the WC and EJ Thornton Foundation for their support of this exhibition. If you are in the Denver area, Archive 192 is on display until November 15th. This panel is being recorded and will be added to the website this week. We are so excited to have Louie Palu and Chloe Coleman here this weekend. Louie will be teaching a workshop, which there's still some space in. And we have an event on Sunday, the 19th, a wine event, and I will put links in the chat for both of those. Archive 192 is a not-for-profit research archive founded in 2015 that is focused on abstractionist photography by women. The goal of this project is to create, share, educate, and it's an amazing exhibition. We have 54 artists on display in ours, so just a subset of the 300 pieces, I believe, Louis, that are in the archive. So it's really amazing, and if you are in the area, I would recommend coming to see it. I'm going to do a little introduction of all of our panelists, and then we will have time for Q&A. So please feel free to utilize the chat or the Q&A feature in the webinar. I will be monitoring that. And then I'm going to get us started. So Chloe Coleman is an award-winning photo editor at the Washington Post. Prior to her position in Opinions, she worked for 5 years on the international news desk, and she is a contributing writer and editor on the Washington Post's Insight photo blog, where she has written about and featured contemporary photography, photo books, and exhibitions. And Chloe will be kind of moderating the panel to this afternoon. And Aline Smithson is also joining us from LA, an interdisciplinary artist, filmmaker, educator, and editor. Her practice examines the archetypal foundations of the creative impulse, and she uses humor and pathos to explore the performative potential of photography. She is also the founder of Lens Scratch, an amazing photography journal that celebrates a different contemporary photographer each day. Elizabeth Stone is joining us, Montana-based artist who explores memory and time through photography's inherent ambiguity. Guided by process, she pushes at the edges of how photographs are defined and seen. And last but not least, Claire Warden, an interdisciplinary artist who works in still and moving image media. Her work engages representation, portraiture, racialized experience and language in the United States through abstraction and experimental image making in a multi-year project. She's currently producing a self-published book through the Penumbra Risograph publication residency that'll be available in early December. And last but not least, also Louie, founder of Archive 192, very talented photographer. I did not pull your bio. Sorry, Louie. And then I'm gonna share my screen and get us started with some images so we can see some pictures of the installation. And Chloe, I'll let you take it away with questions.
Thanks, Samantha. First, I just want to say thank you to you and thank you to the Colorado Photographic Arts Center. It's so exciting to have Archive 192 travel to you all, and we can't wait to be with you in Denver this weekend and see the show. Um, my first question for our three talented artists, in the context of your work and the process and the final piece that you create, where does the abstraction begin? And anyone jump in that wants to start off with that topic.
I can. I'm happy to jump in. I would say, sometimes it happens for me in the shower, and abstract thoughts come into my mind as, I'm kind of thinking of something else. But for me, often abstraction often starts with seeing, the seeing component of photography and pre-visualization and how I'm thinking about something, how I'm thinking about a concept or a material. And then certainly also in the hands-on work that I do in different alternative process that are often cameraless. And abstraction also for me falls all the way from the very beginning of the process all the way through until the final presentation of the work. And since I was really young, I've always been really drawn to non-representational art. And sometimes when I'm working with a camera, I work with pretty close up equipment, which also helps in the abstract process. And I would say at the heart of my work, something that's really important to me is the idea of transformation. And I feel that abstraction and transformation go hand in hand.
I'll jump in. I got my degree in art, not in photography, and I was a painter, and all my paintings were abstract. And it's a world that I'm very comfortable in and drawn to. And I really think about the photographic image and how I can tell a story by altering it somehow. Like I want someone to look and go, what is going on here? And then find the deeper meaning in the work through the abstraction. And so that's my answer.
Aline, I didn't know that you started out as a painter, which is so lovely because that is where my practice as an artist really was rooted as well, was in drawing and painting. And abstraction was something that I just was I gravitated to at a really young age. I remember encountering like books on, artists like Jean Miro and Alexander Calder and just like Miro in particular, I just was really fascinated by, even as a really young person. So yeah, I mean, and in the work, abstraction begins, it's inherent to the process. I work cameralessly with this body of work and use a unique process. There was years ago, I keep saying a decade ago, but time keeps moving forward and it's definitely over a decade now. It was probably around 2012 or 13 that I started experimenting with 4x5 and 8x10 film. And one of those experiments was applying saliva to the emulsion of film. And that's really the basis of this work that, breaks down the emulsion using the digestive enzymes of saliva. And what's left over is biologic matter and metallic silver. And then I do a mark making process. And that took years to develop, but, abstraction is inherent to that cameraless process.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like you all kind of touched on this a little bit in your answers to the first question, but unconventional photographic processes are an important element that I notice in all of your work. What particularly drew you to those processes versus the more traditional use of the camera?
I feel like I was just kind of getting there, so I can kind of just jump in and start responding to that. But so that process that I started around 2013-ish, I really had to test it and find out if this was just a one-off or if this is something that I could reproduce. And once I realized that this process was really uniquely qualified to address some of the questions I was developing about photography and a lot of things that felt really finite about photography, especially coming from the world of painting and drawing, where you can work on an artwork for eternity, for all of time. So I was really kind of looking at ways to extend the moment of making a photograph, but I was also thinking about questions of identity and identity formation. And one thing that this work really kind of elicits in a photographic context is, what am I looking at? And I found that that was really uniquely qualified to address some some issues and questions and research that I was doing around my own experience of being asked, "What are you?" And that question started, I started hearing that question when I moved to the United States. And I grew up in Montreal and was predominantly French speaking. So I thought it was my translation error to not understand, like, what are you? What is reserved for objects? No, like, the question is, how are you? Why are you? But what just confused me. Um, and so I think, to be able to look at a photograph and not immediately understand it in a clear way really kind of ties these experiences together. And so that's where I really wanted to go with this process.
Elizabeth, Arlene, anything you want to jump in on that topic of
Sure, I'll go. As an editor, I look at hundreds of bodies of work. Um, and I still want to keep my work unique. I'm not necessarily inspired by others other than just celebrating their work. But I've always found when process and subject collide, it's really a home run for me personally. It's a subjective point of view. And I think like Louie's project of putting portraits in ice, like things that are not normally done in photography really make us think differently. And I'm really drawn to process being part of the subject matter. And when I see work that is using that, I'm really drawn to the images. And the process in this work um, really speaks to the loss of the physical photo. I have for years watched my children never make a photographic print, have no visual legacy like I did growing up. And so I wanted to start creating work that was deteriorating a portrait or a memory using chemicals and other elements to call attention to the fact that we're not preserving our photographic histories anymore. We don't keep photo albums. There's no tangible future for the photograph. It's all on screens now. So, and I still only shoot film. So that's my that's probably abstract at this point.
Aline, I can definitely relate to what were you saying about process and subject, and when that marriage kind of happens, it really is such a wondrous thing that happens with alternative processes. And also just to circle back around too on the first question, I love hearing that you both had a background in drawing and painting because I grew up drawing as well. And so it's nice to have that dovetailing of all our histories here and the background that we share. And I was a Miro fan as well, and Kandinsky, so lots of nice intermingling here. For me, I jumped on the digital bandwagon when it came out, and it certainly has its place. But I kind of lost interest in the digital process and went back to where I started. I learned photography in high school. We actually had a darkroom program. And since I'm old, that meant film and all the different formats of cameras and learning the darkroom. And that was joyous to be able to be in such a long process in order to get to that, even to that test strip. And we'd run out in the light and evaluate and go back in, and hours would fly by. And you still wouldn't even come out with potentially an image that you were searching for. And so I returned to these slower processes a number of years ago. And this particular piece that's up on this screen is a chemogram process that I discovered when I was teaching alternative process. And it's something that feels a little contrary in photography in that a lot of it is done in light. And I like it when you can mix photography up and push at it and I sculpt photographic paper a lot, thinking about the photograph even more as a three-dimensional object. And I'm really interested in installation work right now. This is a recent installation that I did for a museum commission last year. But these alternative processes are so appealing to me, and I imagine both of you, because it's hands-on, right? It's very tactile and in the making of our objects. And I also like the unpredictability of these processes. I don't necessarily know what's going to happen when I throw motor oil on photographic paper and expose it in developer and then fixer in the light. And I love that unpredictability. I love that failure that happens, but also that success that happens. So I see a lot of nice similarity between all of our work here. This is another installation of small little chemogram squares.
Yeah, I feel like there's an even bigger draw these days to alternative processes as all of us out there are looking for ways to connect with art beyond the screen. It's wonderful to see objects and things that have texture and pieces that, have layers and three-dimensionality. So it's wonderful to hear all of you talk about that you came to photography through, drawing and painting. I know Louie and I actually have that in common with you all as well. Aside from drawing and painting or maybe other forms of art, where do you find your inspiration for the works you create? Is it within photography or is it without photography, maybe nature or things in daily life?
For me, it's always painting. If I feel uninspired, I go to a museum and look at paintings. Um, there's one of my earlier darkroom series that is hand painted. It's called Shadows and Stains. I made it in response to the fact that my darkroom closed, and when digital came out, and it really impacted the way we work. I was so angry. I started making darkroom prints about that subject. But you can see the direct line to my influence with Richard Diebenkorn, who was one of my favorite artists. Um, and a lot of my paintings were very similar to Diebenkorn's. And I watched how he used to paint landscapes, and then slowly, slowly, the landscape turned into lines and forms, and there was um, nothing recognizable other than shape and color. And I've always been drawn to that work, and I still want to make work like that. So, but I always am. I love looking at paintings.
I would say often I go to literature and then I also go to painting as well, Aileen. But literature is a great source of inspiration for me, whether it's no matter what I'm reading, often a phrase I'll just jot down in my journal, and the juxtaposition of certain words just get my wheels turning in a way that I haven't thought of before. Um, and since I've been lately really interested in installation art as a photographer, I'm looking at a lot of sculptors. Um, been a big fan of Andy Goldsworthy since I learned about him decades ago, and I know he has a great retrospective right now that I wish I could get overseas to see. And Alan Surratt is another sculptor that I am really intrigued with. So for me, it's literature and right now sculptors. And occasionally I'll come across a photographer that's like, wow, I wouldn't have gone there. I'm surprised at what they're making. And I love that when that happens, when, it connects with your brain and you get even more curious about the work and how that applies to your own work.
Yeah, I mean, I would definitely second literature. What I'm reading, my research really inspires what I end up making. And that research is generally surrounding, lived experience as a person of color in the United States, or identity formation, or history, and but maybe even more so, photographic materiality is a major inspiration for the way that I work. The work that I'm doing wouldn't have happened if I wasn't curious about the materiality of photography, about the materiality of black and white negatives and what is possible with them, and what I could do to push the boundaries of photography. And In terms of artists, I'm actually, I wouldn't necessarily say inspired by, but I like to think of it as like an archipelago of dialogue, people that, I hope my work is in dialogue with. So I think about artists like Adrian Piper, or Jack Whitten, or Stanley Brown, that really were working within their medium and exploring the boundaries of those mediums. And also thinking about the self. Yeah.
Yeah, Claire, I've always loved how your work is so abstract but deals so closely with identity and your identity. How does the abstraction play a role in the way that you explore your identity?
I love this question, because, I spent a long time trying to find an answer to the question, what are you? And when I was younger, eventually I realized that, saying I'm Canadian or I'm a naturalized American wasn't the answer that people who are asking that question were seeking. Over time, I realized, if I said, my father was born in India, that would satisfy the question, but that wasn't really necessarily about me. So I pushed that answer, and kind of in a flippant way, I tried to find ways to answer that was more satisfactory to me. And I also think about like how that work is so tied to my own exploration of that. We think we're dealing with a world of representation, right? Around us, but also within photography, oftentimes, right? We think we're dealing with representation, but actually we're quite surrounded by abstraction, right? So, our realities are interpretations of our perception, and that's incredibly abstract. So when structures demand concreteness or clear delineations between this or that, I find that we actually understand less. So, for example, if I were to say I'm American, what does that mean exactly? And what does it mean when it's coming from somebody who's a naturalized American versus born American, right? So this is a mutable, it's shape-shifting concept. So depending on who's stating it, defining someone I find to be like within social constructs, like ultimately really reduces the multitudinous and the nuances of a human. So a few years ago, I was reading a book called I Am That by Sri Nisargadatta Maharaj. And these are like transcribed interviews. And he says, there's no way that you can say what you are because humans are far too complex for that. So what you can say is what you are not. That's as close as you can get to discovering what you are. And so it took me years to start unraveling these things, these responses after these interrogations of like, what are you? To start unraveling the things that had been impressed on me, and to become more comfortable with the unknown and illegibility. So, the work is really tied to my investigations of identity, somatically and intellectually. I can keep going, but
Thank you, Claire. I'll circle back with some follow-ups, but a question for Aline. your work spans a lot of forms of abstraction, but you also have work that is more pure documentary. When do you shift towards abstractionism within specific bodies of work? Why do you decide to do that for specific work?
Each work is unique. I don't want to make the same work all the time, and I like trying out different ways of producing it. Let's see, did write. It really begins with the story I want to tell, and sometimes it can be just really regular photography that is not abstracting anything. But I also find failure as a guide. I have a lot of failure in my work, and I actually get very excited when something fails because it takes me down a completely different path, and that path is usually in some abstract form. Um, I have a sister project to the fugue state that we showed earlier, where my hard drive of 20 years of analog scans died, and I got back corrupted files. And of course I was upset, but I also thought, wow, a whole new way of working. And so I combined those with cyanotypes and made something physical out of something that was lost. And so each time I come to a process or a subject in a completely unique way. And I, I don't want to be the person whose work is so recognizable because I've just done the same thing over and over and over. I really love just trying out new things all the time.
That's a great story about your hard drive. What an amazing way to come to a new body of work. We should all use that in our life in a lot of ways with problems that come up and heartaches. Um, Elizabeth, your work shows such a meticulous process. You can tell your attention to detail in your practice is incredible. A lot of your work reminds me of processes you see in nature, the strata and geography personally. Um, how do you find harmony between such a meticulous approach and your final pieces that often sometimes appear to embrace chaos in a way that could be in conflict with such a process?
Um, Thanks, Chloe. I love this question. When I got it a little bit ago, I was like, wow, very interesting. I like it when it gets your wheels spinning, right? When someone sees something in your work that you're not necessarily aware of. And I would say the short answer for that is that finding harmony is a dance, just like in all our relationships, other human relationships. But in the art process, it's a dance between me, the process itself, my hands, the materials, and kind of the energy that's guiding it all. Um, and I really enjoyed this question because I looked up just out of curiosity what Webster would think about the word chaos. And I thought, well, according to Webster, chaos is defined as complete disorder and confusion. And then it said, in terms of physics, behavior so unpredictable as to appear random, owing to great sensitivity to small changes in conditions. And what struck me in that definition was the idea of randomness, because that's something I think a lot about in many of the processes that I do. Is it possible to be completely random when a human is interacting with materials? And so that's something that I do investigate as I am making my work with the particular processes. But there's also always choice and structure within the art making. And Aline, I loved hearing you saying that your failure is often a guiding force. And I would say that's the same for me. In the project Oil and Land, I was at a residency and I was making these chemograms. And I just wasn't sure, like there's part of it that keeps you going. And I know you all understand that in the process, but you're not sure, where is that road going to curve and where is it going to end up? and I was in the last week of my residency, and I got really frustrated one day, and I literally just took this big 16 by 20 chemogram and I ripped it in half. And then I looked at the edge of that chemogram and I thought, oh my goodness, there's the next road. There's the next possibility for the work over time. So I also love that the idea of failure. And Pema Chodron has a wonderful book about, I think it's called Fail, Fail Better, Keep Failing. And it's a wonderful, inspiring book about the nature of failure and how it can lead us into unknown areas that are really full of discovery. Um, so I would say the harmony happens with everything that's going on. I started a mindfulness meditation process in 2019, and that has dramatically affected how I think about process and making and the work that's appearing in the last, well, 6 years now. So the short answer is dance, and long answer, how many hours do we have? Because we could all keep going for many hours on process and why we make what we make and how we do it, and I could keep going. So. I also like to burn. That's another thing I love to do is I take my test prints and my mistakes and I burn them in an old oil barrel. And then one day I looked down in the bottom of the barrel and it looked like a planet. And I thought, oh my goodness, here is another body of work that emerged. So constant discovery.
Yeah, those discoveries and pieces of art processes are part of what Louie and I like collecting too. We like test strips. We like collecting those tests that get you to the pieces that end up being your final pieces as well. Claire, I saw you nodding along to the thread of failure leading to the next step. Is there anything you wanted to add to that?
Yeah, sure. I think about actually don't use the word failure. Not because I don't think that's an important part of growth, but because in this body of work, because I can extend that process of making an image for so long, I don't have pieces that don't work. They just aren't finished. So some pieces I've been working on for a very long time, many, many years, because they just, I will work on them and I'll scan them. So I'm working with the negative, which I think I mentioned already, but, and I work with that in my studio. So it's a negative that's already developed. And then I do this biologic process and then I do mark making. And so that mark making process can take a long time if I haven't got to the point where it feels complete. And sometimes, I work on a negative and I do sketches and I do all this research and I have this intention for the work and I do it and it works and that's great and it feels complete to me. And sometimes it doesn't work and it doesn't feel complete to me. And that's where, I have to put it away for a little while and come back to it and keep working on it. So this is a body of work that, I could end up doing my entire life. But I actually don't feel that, that failure is necessarily part of that process. It's just that things may not work out and I will continue to work on them, which is also maybe just a different definition of failure. But, the point of that is that I'm not discarding something or starting over from something. I'm continuing.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense from another perspective as well. Um, I want to allow the three of you, if you have any questions for each other, to jump in as well, or Samantha, if there was anything you wanted to ask the panelists before we open it up to other questions.
Well, I would like to ask Chloe and Louie how you came to select this as your collecting focus. Because I look at a lot of work and there are so many more women working in alternative processes right now than men, I think. And not just alternative processes, but sewing and altering the photos in different ways. And I don't know if that's because in some ways it feels familiar. I mean, I grew up sewing. There's just things that my husband didn't grow up doing, and it makes for creating work in a different way much easier. And anyway, I'm curious, your thoughts on your focus for your collection and how it got started.
Louie, if you want to jump in and tell the original origin story of the archive, please do.
Okay, so we got to go back in time, maybe even before I met Chloe. I think it was 2012, and I was in the War and Conflict exhibition that Ann Tucker curated at the Houston Museum of Fine Arts. And the curators were talking about how they collected photographs. And my first, I don't want to call them jobs, internships were I worked for Mary Ellen Mark. I worked at Gallery 44 in Toronto. So I was an intern. And who doesn't love going into an archival box and look at people's work? It's just such an exciting experience. And I thought I wanted to make having an archive, like promoting other photographers, as part of my practice. And I had a lot of bad ideas until I met, actually, it wasn't the first time I'd met Rebecca Senf, probably one of the coolest people you can be friends with, and one of the smartest curators I've ever worked with, Rebecca Senf at the Center of Creative Photography. And unbeknownst to me, she's kind of doing, as she would, a little study on me. So I'd mentioned this archive and thought of bad ideas. And she said, "Oh, by the way, there's an auction for the Phoenix Museum of Art, and it's all photography. Would you buy a photograph?" And she said, "Tell me what you like." So I went into the list and I looked and I picked I sent her a list of names. And she said, "I don't know if you know this, but it's all women and it's all abstract." And I was like, she goes, "That's your archive." And I'm like, whoa, like sometimes the answer or your goal is like right in front of you. And I saw Claire's work and I'm like, this is like far and above what's going on I've ever seen. And in some ways, when I read about the work, it's kind of like conceptual documentary, it's like evidence collecting, saliva, it's like DNA. And when we think about documentary, it really fascinated me. So I bought the work at auction, then I had like a heart attack, like, dear God, I just spent hundreds of dollars on someone else's work. I was like terrified, like, what am I doing? And then I got that. And then when you get someone's work and you put on your wall, you're like, whoa, now like I'm the caretaker of this work. And then I bought another print and another print. And then there's this moment where I got a work from the Bauhaus by Florence Henry. And it really it was great because I put Claire's work and the Bauhaus work beside each other. And I thought, this would be really punk rock to have like an archive where you don't have to graduate into a museum to exhibit with work like that. That it's like Claire said, it's a dialogue. And then around this time, my mom got sick and she passed away. A little bit of the money she left me, I thought, and Claire, you're making me emotional. You're talking about sort of, who are you? What are you? Like all this stuff. Because my mom had a friend who functioned in society, but could only read at a grade 6 in Italian. And I just thought I could create this archive and it would kind of like be based a little bit on women and empowering women. And then I just thought of the history of photography. I mean, I'm a photojournalist, so this is like a photojournalism project, because I thought I like Alfred Stieglitz, but I thought it's always this seminal moment, but we don't talk about the gorilla in the room, which is that photo history books come out and there's 3 women and 97 men. And I could not go any further as a photographer without saying it out loud. So I thought, I'm going to do something about it. But by this time I had met Chloe. We were about to get engaged and we worked on it together, and it became, Gallery 291 was Stieglitz's gallery. And we just thought, we're just going to turn it to 192. We're just going to change the order in which we look at something. I don't really believe in firsts, because what does first matter if women are held back and men get to go ahead and be first? So, and also I just think that it's about a bit of a democracy. Like, why can't I show students work with the Bauhaus work? Like, it's about a dialogue. And so this kind of became a little bit of a political statement for us. And we started thinking, well, there are a lot of these shows that show women's work. Like, we're finally having a women photography show. And we were like, why? Like, we need to explain why, because we're journalists. So we started collecting political ephemera by groups like the Guerrilla Girls, and other women's caucus groups in New York had written letters. And we just felt like we had to show the evidence that supports why we're doing this. And that's when it really came together. And that's how we are here today.
Yeah, just to add a little bit on my background and why this was such a natural archive for me to join Louis on. I grew up with two artists for parents. My dad was a glass blower, and my mom was trained as a lithographer, and she's a collage artist. So abstraction and abstract art was part of my childhood. It was the art on the walls. It was the sculptural work that my dad made. So it was something I always just love having around me. It's like, comfort food. And part of what I loved as I learned more about the works that Louis had already collected, and as we started looking for other pieces to collect, is that idea that abstract work can be documentary as well, like Claire's work or some of your work, Eileen. Like it's there are some pieces that I think we have in our archive that I would argue are more documentary than some, documentary photographs that I would see in my work as a photo editor. And in response to the idea of, sewing becoming popular or alternative processes, I think maybe that comes back to the idea that people really do want to touch things more. They want objects. They want to feel like they're making something. I know I experienced that even in my own work because, I'm a creative person at heart, and part of what I do as a photo editor is creative, but I miss making print layouts, working on pages that I can hold, because so much of what I do now is screen based as well.
I'm just gonna jump in and say that one of the things that I really love this archive is abstraction by women, of course, but I also really enjoy that and you both kind of touched on this, that the definition of abstraction, it's not quite like you're defining the abstraction, but actually kind of opening up the possibilities of what abstraction can, or how things can fall into abstraction, which is something that I am definitely interested in as this kind of definition blurring, but still with this kind of core interest in abstraction, but it's quite broad exploration of abstraction.
Yeah, I'd add, a breakthrough I had with Chloe is, what the Guerrilla Girls teach us is, what I like about abstraction is that it's about women taking back representation in some ways. And at one point, we were thinking about ways we could bring in, let's say, call it traditional pictorial photography, and talk about what led to abstraction and this battle over representation. And you'll see, if you get to see the show, there's a Guerrilla Girls poster, and it's got that sort of a cartoon play with the Guerrilla Girl mask of the female figure. It's a poster, and it challenges sort of, why are women always naked in paintings? But then there's a photograph by Anne Brigman, and it's great because it's Stieglitz related. It's in camera work. It's a page from camera work. And it's a photograph that it's a landscape, and the women who are naked are very small. And there is this history, and you never know what's really, there's no tape recorders recording these conversations, but the history that I've read was that she was challenged or criticized for how she photographed women naked. And I just thought putting those two things together is a little bit about letting women say, this is how I want to be represented. Don't tell me what I gotta be. Don't tell me how I gotta look. Don't tell me how I gotta think. And I think, especially right now, I feel like this is a really nice little subversive art exhibition that is pushing back in a way that's really smart. It's nonviolent, it's very peaceful, and it's very intellectual, and it's giving power back to women.
So thank you.
Yes, thank you.
Sam, is there anything else before we
I
turn
didn't
to questions?
I didn't have any other questions, just, you know, thanks to all the artists for, I mean, I know we'll have some questions from the audience, but thanks to all the artists for being here today and your answers about the work. I always love hearing more, knowing all three of your bodies of work. And then also just to, again, Louie, hear you talk more about the archive. Obviously, you and I had talked at length before we brought the work here, but I I love representationally how much, the breadth that is in the collection already. And that's what's so exciting as well to have on the wall and have people come in and say, oh, wow, this is really impressive. I'm like, yes, there's amazing work here as part of this archive that's been created. So, but yeah, we can open it up for questions.
I just add one more thought, uh, something that really is important is we love museums, but museums operate in a very specific way, and we don't. Like when you called us, Sam, I was like, we were nimble and fast. We rolled this out, boom, 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 like a basement punk rock show. Archive 192's up in Denver. I mean, just so everybody watching here, we pulled this here in a few months. It would take museums years to do this, and I just feel like we all we want to do is complement museums and institutions. That's what we're trying to fill a space that Chloe and I felt like was needed filling. So now questions now.
Yeah, I feel like just I reached out in like July to start having. Great. We have one question and feel free to use the Q&A or the chat. We do have one in the Q&A. To the artist, do you focus on one avenue at a time, or do you juggle multiple avenues simultaneously? Do you ever get overwhelmed by your drive to want so many ideas to move forward?
Well, that's a good thing, I think, to have a deep and varied well of ideas and ways of working. So no, I find that, you know, a really significant body of work takes a long time, and a lot of those other things will fall away as you're moving forward on a body of work. Um, Elizabeth and Claire, you can add to that if you want.
If I could just cut in here to promote the archive. Yeah. If someone's watching here and you're like, I'm at a gallery like Sam's, I want Archive 192. And there's some small minimal things we require, nothing like a museum. Get in touch with us. Get in touch with Sam. The crate's built, the work is framed. We could tour this super fast. We can work super fast. And Sam has helped me. Anyone who's curated knows the suffering and pain one can go through. Artist lists, spelling people's name wrong, autocorrect, all that stuff. But this is a total show ready to go, and we have everything's in place. So please contact us and we'll get it into your town or your community.
I'm trying to remember this question, but I just going back to that question, I think I'm constantly working on multiple things, and sometimes it's a necessity to work on multiple things because the work in the body of work mimesis, sometimes the research that informs those pieces can overwhelm and can be very heavy. And I didn't really talk about how those images end up looking the way that they do, but it is a lot of considering lived experience, and then also considering research, and sometimes I need a break from that work. So I have another cameraless body of work that I have worked with on and off for years, called 99 Moons. I also, work with moving image and have started working with projection. So I kind of have a lot of things going on, and I think it's a good thing. I think Aline already said this, but I think it's a good thing to have multiple things of interest going on. Especially for work that when I think about it long term, I think maybe it won't have an end, that it's also good to have other things to take a break from that for me in my practice. Yeah.
I have a question for the three of you. Can I? Oh, sorry, Elizabeth.
No, that's okay. Go
I
ahead.
just thought of something. You know, I'm in my 50s, so I know the narrative of it's a struggle. Like you're trying to get in touch with the curator. There are young artists watching this. I'm going to give a workshop. Can you talk about the need for exhibition spaces or opportunities when you were younger, or even now where you produce a body of work, but like this timeline from like when you're young and you're growing till you finally or never get the call from the museum or the curator, and how there's a need for more spaces like CPAC, like Colorado Photographic Arts Center. Can the three of you talk about or places you're like, hey, but Louis, there's these other exciting places that, and sort of that struggle with sort of the institutions and where you're trying to place your work or show your work?
I think one of the most important things that an artist needs to think about is why they're making the work and the story behind the work, because that's what the curator has to sell to the museum and to the audience. And if you're not making work about something, it's not going to move very, very far. Um, when I started out, of course, this was still there was no digital, you know, I would have to photograph images on slides and send the slides into calls for entry. And I was a horrible slide taker. And I would get, oh, you got into the show, there were 35 submissions and you got in. And now it's like there were 3,500 submissions. There are so many more photographers all reaching for the same goals. It's harder and harder to get your work out, but there are tons more spaces. I mean, I do think there's a lot of platforms. And then I look at someone like Janine Mishna Bales, who, if you look, she has 3 traveling shows, and none of them are in photocentric institutions. They're all in small museums or museums that are not necessarily have art museums. So she's really getting her work out to a whole different population, which I think is really smart. And I think there are opportunities. You just have to not just always go back to the same places. I don't know if that helps.
Yeah, I mean, Louis, I think you were also talking about organizations like CPAC, and in my history of making this work, my first solo exhibition was CPAC's neighbor, Center for Fine Art Photography, and it just happened to work out with the timing. That Sam reached out and we traveled the show from Fort Collins to Denver to CPAC, and that was my second solo exhibition of the work. And to give and that was when was that? That was 10 years ago.
That was 10 years ago because it's right when I started.
Which is incredible.
10 years ago.
It's always 10 years ago.
Yeah.
Yeah, which is incredible, and really, gave the work exposure at a time when I was really, just starting this work and really just starting to understand what it's doing and what it can do and how it speaks to an audience, which is an important thing to also, learn about, because artists may or may not know what they're doing when they're making their work, but they can learn to understand what they want it to do or hope it does. But then also to really let it out into an audience and get feedback and talk to people about what they're seeing in work, especially in work that is, non-representational or abstract. It was really critical for me to have these two exhibitions and get a ton of engagement with the work, and also just to feel supported in general, to have two really incredible organizations that, supported the work. So I think, organizations like CPAC and what Sam does is really critical, and it's really incredible, and all arts nonprofits are doing amazing things on, on a dime of a budget, right? Like, it's just, yeah, it's essential, and it's really, really important in artists' trajectories.
I would agree with that as well, Claire, about Samantha CPAC and all it's done, and its history and its longevity. When you look at institutions that have been folding over, the last 10 years because they haven't been able to make it. But also seeing non-traditional venues popping up, a lot of outdoor venues, and with the ability now for photographs to be printed so many different ways. It's nice to see outdoor and untraditional venues be a possibility for whether you're an emerging artist or mid-career or at the end of your career, be possibilities now, I think, for all stages of careers for photographers.
Yeah, that was that the outdoor spaces for exhibitions. A few years ago, Louis and I went to a festival in Slovenia, the Kran Photo Festival, and they utilized outdoor spaces in such an amazing way, and hanging prints in nature and around kind of the old parts of the town. And Louis had some photographs there too that were in like a basement, right, Lou? Um, Loved seeing work put up in different spaces like that.
Yeah, that's the first time I saw Louis' work was at no, at Click. And they were hanging in a forest. It was really, really a beautiful exhibition.
Yeah, I mean, I think you all are bringing up some really incredible things, and for emerging artists, the comment about, like, that there's so many more people applying for the things that, people want to achieve. And, some recent things that I have juried, it's like one or two opportunities out of 300 applications. It's just kind of incredible, the amount of work that is being made out there, and the number of opportunities that are available. And so on that note of, like, kind of like, a show in a basement, it's like, of course, the organizations that are working really hard to serve artists are incredible. And for artists that, want their work to be seen and aren't getting those opportunities, I mean, tapping into your community and building something, even if it's a pop-up thing for a night or two, just finding ways to get your work out there, even if you have to build it yourself. It all makes a difference, right? It all gets your work out there.
Wait, one more question came in. My question is for Claire. In your early descriptions, you mentioned for the Mimesis project, you mentioned about some issues of identity. So could you please open more about applying your saliva, which is related with these concepts?
Yes. So I'm trying to remember what I've said already. So let me talk about the process just a little bit more. So I'm working with developed negatives and applying the saliva. What that process actually does is it etches the emulsion. So black and white negatives are composed of silver suspended in gelatin on a plastic substrate. And saliva has, of course, DNA, but it also has digestive enzymes. And the digestive enzymes are what break down the emulsion. So it literally is etching the emulsion. And when I start with the negatives, I'm exposing them directly to light, like just directly to sunlight, so that they have silver density. So when I'm working on breaking down the emulsion, the negative is usually black or some sort of shade of gray. And then I do mark making, and all that mark making after that saliva, the process of saliva takes quite a long time. It takes usually about 2 months. It's not a fast process. And then I do mark making when that process is finished. And that mark making, I'm trying to think. In the slideshow that we showed, there was an image, for example, of five black, kind of blackish boxes. They're all kind of vertically lined up. And that piece, when I was at the Lightwork residency, I spent the month there researching. Oh yeah, right there. Awesome. I spent the month researching the race question on the U.S. Census, in particular because the Canadian Census doesn't have a race question, and on the Canadian governmental websites, they specifically say that they don't ask that question because they don't want to engage in, racial social constructs. They lay it out. It is a social construct. And the idea of race was conceptualized by colonial projects and the intentions behind colonial projects. So the Canadian government says that they don't ask that question. And the Canadian census is actually based on the French census. And that doesn't mean that they're not getting that, ethnocultural data. They are still, just in different kinds of ways. But the United States has a different approach. They use the word race. The Office of Management and Budget is the office that, kind of considers this question and came up with the 5 main racial categories that are the predominant, answers on that question. And then now there's, as of, I think, the year 2000, there's like many subcategories and you can choose multiple. Imagine that. But ever since I moved to the United States and I had to fill out these surveys, I gravitated to the response other or some other race. And, thinking carefully about my identity and choosing a response that is other just seems so kind of ridiculous, right? To like other myself, right? Like it seems kind of wild, but in my research, I found out that the categories of other and some other race were predominantly used for people of the Indian subcontinent, among a few other Asian ethnocultural identities and or nationalities. And then so I started to wonder, like, I can't remember the first time I filled out one of these forms or surveys, and did I choose this? Did somebody suggest I choose this? Did this just feel like the most open-ended, undefined option, which is generally what I assume is the reason I chose that answer for so long. But anyway, the image here has those 5 boxes because I was speaking with somebody and they mentioned that those 5 main racial categories are sometimes defined within government bureaucracy as the federal 5, which I thought sounded so impersonal. And so really thinking about, how does one define oneself and why? And how does this language, this bureaucratic language, trickle down into colloquia? And do I choose to engage with it, or do I choose something that is unique to my own identity? And today, I would define myself as like multi-ethnocultural, and that's generally as far as I'm willing to go with that. But there's an image like right above this one that is like kind of split in half, and this references, or maybe it's somewhere around this, but that is in reference to somebody who was trying to relate to my experience. And actually it's a vertical image. I don't know where it is in this PowerPoint, but oh, there it is. Yeah. And this piece, kind of somebody was trying to relate to my experiences, and they said that, I didn't know that you were half. I'm also. And I was like, oh, I would never have defined myself as half, right? And so these, kind of ways that people project onto other people, or, um, in this piece, half really ended up spurring a lot of writing that I ended up doing, and also a performance that I ended up doing, considering, like, the violence that is implicit in language when you say somebody is half instead of someone is whole, right? So anyway, I don't know, maybe that was a little tangential, but I hope I answered that question.
I think it was great. Um, any other questions from the audience? If not, I'll give it a minute. Um, thank you to everyone for joining today. Thank you, Chloe, for the amazing questions, to the artists, Louie and Chloe for creating the archive. Um, Thanks everyone for joining today. As I said, this is being recorded, so we will be putting it on the website and sending a link out. There's lots more programming going on as part of the exhibition, and if you are in the Denver area, do please stop by. It's a fantastic exhibition. So thanks everybody. Thanks for joining, and we'll see you all soon.
Thank you so much.
Thanks everyone.
See
Bye.
you.
Bye.
Bye, thank you.